New Year's, anniversaries, Formula One podiums. So what do all these things have in common? Well, you're pretty much guaranteed to find some bottles of bubbly. Because popping bottles and spraying bubbles everywhere is probably, I don't know, one of our greatest human pastimes. But champagne in its sparkling form hasn't been around for that long. And champagne is just one of several different kinds of sparkling wine out there. Yeah, while champagne will seemingly forever hold the throne as the go-to sparkling wine option, it can be freaking expensive. But luckily for us, there are way more affordable options out there, and just because they're affordable doesn't mean you're downgrading either, okay? What we're gonna talk about today is just what sparkling wine is and how it's made, what makes champagne so iconic in the sparkling wine world, as well as what little options for bubbles you can look for when you want to ball on a budget, you know what I'm saying? So let's do this. My name's Daniel, let's talk some bubbles. Bubble, 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 bubble. Yeah. So, what is sparkling wine? Well, if you guessed wine with bubbles, then you are 100% correct. That's exactly what it is. But we're not talking about your everyday soda bubbles or sparkling water bubbles. No. We don't just pop some carbonation in there. That's not how we do it. These bubbles are au natural, just naturally occurring. Those are bubbles. If you didn't get the gesturing. Commercial sparkling wine, including champagne, actually hasn't been around for that long. You know, champagne has been recognized for wine since at least the 1500s. Champagne being synonymous with sparkling wines is still a pretty new thing. So sparkling wine has kind of been around forever in one way or another. It was just always viewed as a fault in the wine. But if people weren't trying to make bubbles, then where the heck were the bubbles coming from? So, to better understand how we get the bubbles, let's take a quick step back and take a look at how we get the wine in the first place. This alcoholic fermentation thing. The magical process that changes our grape juice into the booze juice that we all love requires a couple of things. Mainly sugars and yeast. And simply, these little tiny microorganisms, this yeast, just starts to chomp away at the sugars and changing those sugars into alcohol and carbon dioxide. So usually, wine is fermented in something that allows this carbon dioxide to just release and blow off. But what would happen if you were to, say, trap all this gas in some confined space? Like, I don't know, a bottle? Exactly. And basically, what happened back in them early winemaking days is they would think that their fermentation was done when in fact it just halted because a drop in temperature usually. But after the winter, when the temperature started to come back up, all that yeast started to wake up as well and started chomping away at whatever sugars were left. But this time, that wine was no longer in something open. That gas got trapped and boom! Fizzy wine. Let's get physical, 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 physical. Can I please not do that again? But how did these bubbles go from being some obscure wine fault to being the brunch staples that we know today? You know, I mean, could you imagine brunch without bubbles? No, you can't. But luckily for us, after some time and careful human innovations, we went ahead and made the amazing bubbles that we know today. But what is it still that sets champagne apart from the rest of these sparkling wines? What makes it so special? Of course, the goal for any sparkling wine is to have some bubbles. And like we just talked about, these bubbles are a natural byproduct of the alcoholic fermentation. One way of doing this is just by bottling the wine early before the fermentation is finished, and you just trap whatever gases are left over. If you've ever had a Pétillant Naturel or a Pet Nat wine, then you've had a wine made in this way before. We also refer to this process as the ancestral method, given the kind of old school approach to it all. While the ancestral method can get you some great results, and Pet Nat is an awesome example of some deliciously affordable sparkling wine, they can be a little bit inconsistent, and straight up, the bubbles aren't going to be as refined as what you're going to get from champagne. But why is that? What makes champagne so freaking special? Well, first off, in champagne, they don't use no old-timey ancestral method, you hear? To be clear up front, there is way more to what makes champagne special than what we can cover today in this little video here, so we're gonna have to save some of that for a whole nother video. But what we can cover today is the champagne method of making sparkling wine. The champagne method, also referred to as the traditional method, is pretty much the blueprint for making sparkling wine like all over the planet, like everywhere. What is it that sets the champagne method apart from the ancestral method? Well, first off, the champagne method requires a whole new fermentation, or a secondary fermentation. So basically, we're going to make a wine fully fermented. That's going to be our base wine. Then we're going to bottle that wine and start a whole new little mini fermentation inside that bottle. So how about that? What am I, Jack Black?
You're thinking about being my baby. It don't matter if Jack Black or white.
Now, let's talk about this base wine real quick. This base wine. Base. This base wine can be a single variety wine, it can be a blend, it's really up to the winemaker, and a blend or a cuvee can be as simple as a few wines, or you can be like Krug over there doing like 150 different wines in their blend, going nuts. But it's kind of part of what makes their wine so uniquely amazing. This base wine really sets the tone for the final bottle of bubbles you're going for. Basically, we made a still wine, that wine is in the bottle, and now we need to get bubbles. And to get bubbles, we need some more fermentation action to happen. So we're gonna need some more yeast and some more sugar. In comes the liqueur de tirage. So we got a little mixture here of wine, sugars, and yeast. This dosage gets added to our base wine in the bottle. We cap that bottle, and you know, the yeast starts doing its thing again, and all of a sudden, boom, we got some more fizzy juice. Fizzy juice. Not only do you have some bubbles, this process also allows for more refined, more delicate, smaller bubbles, which is just, you know, makes it that much more yummy. Now, besides the bubbles, our secondary fermentation also gives us another little useful byproduct, which we call the lees. Fine lees. Fine, super fine lees. So you see the joyful story of the simple yeast cell just spending its life eating sugar, pissing booze, just to die off in a pool full of wine. That actually doesn't sound half bad. But those dead yeast cells are what help make up the lees. And the lees are important to winemaking because it can give a wine more complex aromatics, more richness, creamier texture. These added characteristics are especially useful in high acid wines, like sparkling. That's why often the best champagnes, the most expensive champagnes, will have spent years resting on the fine lees in the bottle. While this dead yeasty graveyard is very good for our wine making, it's not so good for our wine drinking. So how do we get rid of these lees without ruining the bubbles that we work so hard for? Well, we got a solution for that too, thanks to Madame Clicquot Ponsardin of this little place you might have heard of called Veuve Clicquot. She cleverly came up with a process of turning the bottles slightly, bit by bit, through the aging process to move the sediment from the bottom of the bottle delicately over into the neck of the bottle. And once all the sediment was concentrated at the cap, the neck would get flash frozen and the cap removed along with all the sediment. And there you go. Boom, we have some clean wine and some bubbles. This is empty. The process of turning the bottle is called riddling, and then the removal of the cap is called disgorging. Both riddling and disgorging are very important to the traditional or champagne method. So we got our nice, clean, sparkling wine, and we could just stop right here if we wanted to. We could just go ahead and drink that bad boy. But for the most part, there is going to be one last little tiny weensy addition to the wine. Essentially a little syrupy mixture made up of wine and natural grape sugars that gets added to the wine to bring it balance or give it just some sweetness. And this liqueur d'expédition is added at different dosage or dosage levels, and these dosage levels are going to determine the final sweetness of the wine. For example, when you see the term brut on a champagne label, like 90% of champagne, what brut is trying to tell you is the dosage of the wine. So basically, when you see brut, it's telling you that wine has anywhere between 0 to 12 grams per liter of residual sugar, meaning it's still going to be a pretty dry wine at the end of the day. Whereas if the label says demi-sec, then you're going to expect that wine to have anywhere from 32 to 50 grams per liter of residual sugar, almost 4 times as much residual sugar, resulting in, probably a little bit of a sweeter wine. And there it is, the champagne method. You have now unlocked a brand new, delicious, sparkling bottle of bubbly. Congratulations. And I know this is a lot of new information coming your way, but believe me, once you understand the traditional method of making sparkling wines, you're gonna understand like 94.35782% of all sparkling wines made around the world. That's fact. That's a statistic from a book. Look it up. So we got the ancestral method and the traditional method. And the ancestral method is amazing for those delicious pet nat wines, but they can be a bit inconsistent and tough to make in large quantities. And the traditional method wines can be a bit more consistent and you can make them in larger quantities, but they are a bit more expensive and more labor intensive. So how do we get more bubbles and more quantity with keeping it a little bit more cost effective? Because again, we need enough bottles of bubbly for brunch, or else the world will go crazy. So for a more economical approach to bubbles, we go ahead and look to the Charmat method. The Charmat method is based on a lot of the same ideas, right? We're gonna still trap some gases from a secondary fermentation, but this time, instead of trapping them in a small little bottle, we're gonna trap them in a big old stainless steel tank. Big old tank. Big old... Oh shit. This tank method is pretty efficient and produces some light, easygoing, inexpensive sparkling wines. Probably the best known of the Charmat method wines is Prosecco. And people often wonder why Prosecco and Champagne are priced way differently, and part of it is just the fact that Prosecco is easier to make. Champagne requires a bit more hands-on, labor-intensive approach, so if you want that extra hand-tailored quality to your sparkling wine, then you are going to need to invest in champagne. Or is it just champagne? Is it just champagne? Do we only need to have champagne to have a good traditional method sparkling wine? Personally, I love me some sparkling vino, and while I wish I could have champagne every single day of the week, I cannot afford that kind of life. So, luckily for me and for all of us, there are several amazing sparkling wine options that are done in the traditional method. And here we go. I'm gonna give you the secret. I'm gonna give you, the little lowdown here. I'm gonna tell you at least, my top 5 go-tos for traditional method sparkling wines that are not champagne. And then we're gonna work on a shorter title for that list. Number 5. Cava. Cava! So Spain has some amazingly delicious and affordable tradition method sparkling wines in the form of cava. And I would suggest keeping an eye out for bottles labeled Piña or Corpinat for some added bonus bubbly deliciousness. Trust me. Number 4, Franciacorta. So this is Italy's direct challenger to champagne. And Franciacorta is not Prosecco, totally different thing. Franciacorta is a top quality sparkling wine and the production standards are crazy high. Number 3, the good old US of A. You might be surprised to know that there is some really seriously yummy sparkling wine options out of the US, but yeah, think about it. There are plenty of champagne houses that have little side projects over here. And I wouldn't just check out California, I'd check out some more low-key spots as well, like, the Finger Licks of New York or something like that. Number 2, Cremant. France has many other places outside of Champagne that produce traditional method sparkling wines. These wines are called Cremant. You'll usually see a wine labeled Cremant and then wherever it's from. So it'll be Cremant d'Alsace or Cremant de Loire. And these alternative French sparkling options are an easy go-to, like any day of the week, like all the time. And finally, my number 1 go-to for a bottle of bubbly that is not champagne is gonna be Sekt. German sparkling wine, or Sekt, is just a no-brainer if I see it on a list or if I see it on a shelf. I'm just snatching up that bad boy real quick, you better believe me, because, I just love me some German sparkling wines. But this is just my top 5 list. Maybe you have some different thoughts. Maybe there's a sparkling wine that I left off of here that you need to tell me about, so put it right down there in those comments so I can see it and, we can talk about it, engage. Or argue, I don't know. I don't want to argue. We just talk wine, talk juice. I like that. Because yeah, at the end of the day, there are so many amazingly delicious options for some bubbly from all over the place. So all I'm saying is, do yourself a favor. When you see a bottle of bubbles from Australia or England or Chile or wherever, just go for it. Give yourself that amazing, uplifting, beautiful feeling that only a bottle of bubbles can do for you. Just enjoying a bottle of delicious bubbles, just dancing. Beautiful, tiny little ballerinas dancing on your palate, doing leaps and jumps in the air, little twirls. Wow. What a flavor, what a beauty, what a magic. I don't know what voice that is. It's like Morgan Freeman trying to do an impression of Christopher Walken. So there you go. You got the basics on some sparkling wine. And now you're ready to go out there and try some new, fun bottles of bubbly, I hope. So yeah, I really hope that you enjoyed this video. And just get ready for many more coming your way here at By the Glass. And until then, cheers.